Snow was blasting sideways when the alert flashed red. Patricia Thornton crawling through the whiteout straight toward my root cellar flashlight trembling in her hand. She wasn't lost. She wasn't scared. She was hunting. And on my monitor, I watched the HOA president kneel in the snow and jam a crowbar into my grandfather's old steel door like she'd done this 100 times. She slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. That was her mistake, because while she thought she was breaking in, she didn't know that closing that door meant she'd just locked herself deep underground with no way out. And I hadn't even activated the trap yet. Patricia Thornton had a way of convincing herself that anything she wanted automatically belonged to her. That was her real talent, turning obsession into policy and enforcing it with a smile sharp enough to cut. The first day she came onto my property, she didn't knock. She inspected, clipboard-out eyes, scanning my grandfather's land like she was conducting a military sweep. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a greeting. It was a list 12 supposed violations, each more ridiculous than the last. Fence height, paint tone, unauthorized structure, and of course the root cellar she'd eventually break into. I told her calmly that my land predated the HOA. Her rules didn't apply to me. Her smile twitched like a nerve misfiring. From that moment on, she treated my exemption like a personal insult. Over the next months, she escalated the way only someone addicted to control can. Letters from lawyers, photos taken at dawn, HOA proposals rewritten specifically to rope my property under her command. And when all of that failed, she cornered me after a board meeting with a whisper meant to sound reasonable. If I have to find evidence myself, I will. It wasn't a threat then, but it became one the night she crawled through a blizzard with a flashlight and a crowbar, heading straight for the cellar she believed held her victory. She had no idea she was walking into her own defeat. I didn't plan on becoming the center of an HOA war. When I moved back to my grandfather's property 3 years ago, all I wanted was quiet. 5 acres of pine forest, a centuries-old root cellar, and enough distance from town to hear myself think. My grandfather built everything on solid principles. Document what you plant, protect what you build, and never rely on someone else to guard what's yours. I didn't know then how literal that last part would become. The land was legally exempt from the HOA, older than the subdivision itself, stamped and certified in county records. But the moment Patricia learned that exemption existed, she treated it like a loophole she was morally obligated to close. Life before her involvement was simple: mornings in the garden, evenings cataloging heritage seeds, weekends repairing the cellar or restoring old tools. The rhythm suited me, slow, predictable, meaningful. But subtle signs of trouble started early. A car idling too long near my driveway, my mailbox opened and left crooked, a neighbor mentioning concerns about property values without naming the source. Then came the first letter from the HOA's attorney. 12 violations, a demand to relocate the unpermitted bunker, referring to the root cellar that had stood since the 1942, a threat of liens, none of it legally enforceable. I responded with documentation, maps, statutes, historic permits. Patricia went silent, but not because she accepted the truth. Silence was just her way of recalibrating. Her next move was digital. A neighborhood group she created started posting photos of my property, claiming neglect, creating panic about safety hazards. I never replied. I simply archived everything, screenshot by screenshot. But the real break happened at the November HOA meeting, when Patricia unveiled a proposal to expand jurisdictional boundaries, a thinly veiled attempt to seize authority over my land. I publicly dismantled the plan with the same patience I used in research, facts, citations, logic. The vote against her was overwhelming. She left early that night, but not before stopping beside my truck, breathing winter air like fumes. "You think you won?" she said. "Everyone saw the truth," I replied. She leaned closer. "Then I'll find new truth." That was the moment peace cracked, because I finally understood she didn't want compliance. She wanted control. And people who crave control don't stop until they hit something immovable, like a locked steel door in a blizzard. It started small enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. A note tucked under my truck wiper about community harmony, a flyer taped to my mailbox about proper aesthetic standards. None of it carried Patricia's name, but her language was unmistakable. Then, the neighborhood group she moderated lit up with posts about a property degrading neighborhood value. She never called me out directly. She didn't have to. A blurry photo of my house at dusk was enough to spark a thread of comments, some supportive, some suspicious, some clearly influenced by her narrative. I didn't respond publicly. I simply documented everything: timestamps, comment threads, deleted posts, but the shift was obvious. Neighbors who once waved now lingered at the edge of my property line, with their dogs looking a little too long at my cellar or fence line. Patricia hadn't escalated legally yet. She was softening the ground, shaping a story where she was the protector and I was the threat. It was subtle, but subtlety is easy to spot when you've spent 20 years studying patterns. And this pattern was tightening. The first real line she crossed came at sunrise one cold October morning. I stepped outside with coffee in hand and caught Patricia standing just inches onto my property, camera raised, snapping photos of the root cellar like she was documenting a crime scene. She didn't flinch when she saw me, didn't apologize. She simply lowered the camera and said, "I'm assessing safety risks. You should thank me." I told her to leave immediately. Instead, she took 2 more photos before stepping back across the line, as if timing her retreat gave her jurisdiction. That same afternoon, a new lawyer letter arrived, this one claiming the root cellar posed a structural hazard and required inspection. Again, completely illegal. Again, she knew it. I upgraded my security system that night, perimeter sensors, wider camera angles, encrypted cloud backups. Not out of fear, out of prediction. Patricia wasn't improvising. She was escalating with intent. She needed evidence, and if she couldn't find it legally, she'd look for it physically. Her boundary testing was no longer symbolic. It was reconnaissance. 3 weeks later, I found the first real sign she was preparing something bigger. The outer lock on the cellar, old mechanical, harmless, had fresh scratch marks around the keyhole. Not deep enough to be a break-in attempt, but enough to tell me someone was testing tools, testing angles, testing time. 2 days after that, my mailbox was ripped halfway off its post. The sheriff chalked it up to kids or weather. I didn't argue. I already knew who did it, and more importantly, why she needed problematic behavior from me, something she could claim justified intervention. Her campaign crescendoed at the November HOA meeting. She unveiled her jurisdiction expansion proposal with a confidence bordering on delusion. Slides, charts, claims about unregulated structures. It was a policy engineered specifically to swallow my land under her control. I dismantled her plan with maps and statutes. When the board voted against her publicly, overwhelmingly, she didn't respond with shock. She responded with fury. After the meeting, she approached my truck, eyes hard, voice low. "You embarrassed me," she said. "You're hiding something in that cellar, and I will prove it." Her voice had changed sharper, thinner, almost trembling. I realized then she wasn't escalating out of strategy. She was escalating out of desperation. The calls began a week later. The sheriff's office reached out twice about anonymous reports claiming suspicious activity on my land. One alleged chemical storage. Another alleged unlicensed construction. Both were baseless, both easily disproved, but that wasn't the point. Patricia was testing whether she could weaponize law enforcement the way she'd weaponized the HOA. My lawyer advised me to stay calm, stay factual, and above all, keep documenting. Every report, every neighbor's comment, every time Patricia's car coasted slowly past my property at odd hours. It was clear what she was building, a narrative of danger, of non-compliance of a homeowner so problematic that drastic action might feel justified. Pressure from above, through legal channels. Pressure from below, through community rumor. And always, always the cellar at the center of her obsession. Whatever she told herself, whatever fantasy she'd spun about what I kept down there, it was strong enough to override caution, reason, and eventually the law itself. The blizzard should have sent anyone else running indoors, but Patricia pushed deeper into it like the storm was an accomplice. At 6:15 p.m., my camera caught her fighting through the whiteout, her hood plastered with ice, her flashlight locked onto one target, the entrance to my underground vegetable root cellar. She didn't slow down. She didn't look around. She marched straight to that steel door like she'd finally reached the treasure she'd been obsessing over for months. To her, that cellar wasn't a storage space for produce and heritage seeds. It was the imagined crime scene she needed to justify everything she'd done. She dropped to her knees, set her backpack down, and pulled out tools, professional ones. Picks, wedges, a compact crowbar. She'd planned this, rehearsed it, believed whatever she expected to find inside would hand her victory. But when she forced the outer lock, slipped into the corridor, and pulled the door shut behind her, reality turned. The Cold War-era bolt slammed into place. She turned the handle. It didn't move. Patricia hadn't broken into my root cellar. She'd walked into a concrete vault, designed so no one could leave without authorization. And in that moment, she wasn't uncovering evidence. She became the evidence. The storm had weakened by the time Deputy Hanlon's SUV crawled up my driveway, snow grinding under his tires. I recognized him instantly, the same deputy who'd handled a noise complaint months earlier, back when all this felt like normal suburban friction. Tonight his expression tightened as I led him around the house toward the root cellar, the wind still pushing light drifts across his boots. The broken mechanical lock hung twisted against the steel door, exactly what my camera had captured. Hanlon examined it with a slow, confirming nod, before radioing for a second unit and medical support. Even without seeing the video yet, the damage told its own story. "All right, Mr. Booth," he said, stepping back. "Go ahead." I opened the lock app. The electronic bolt released with a hollow clunk that echoed through the concrete corridor. When Hanlon pulled the door open, Patricia stumbled forward into the snow, wrapped in her coat, shaking more from shock than cold. Her flashlight dangled uselessly in her hand. For months she'd shown up at meetings like she owned the community. Now she stood in the doorway of my vegetable root cellar like someone waking up from a nightmare she created herself. And this time, she didn't get to set the rules. While the paramedics checked her vitals, I pulled up the footage on my phone. Hanlon joined me just outside the cellar entrance, snow melting on his shoulders as he watched the timeline unfold. The video showed everything: Patricia crossing my property in the blizzard, crouching at the cellar door, unpacking tools she'd clearly planned to use, forcing the mechanical lock, entering, sealing herself inside, attempting random codes on the tempting electronic keypad, and eventually sitting in the corridor, with her flashlight dying beside her. Then came the lock logs, each failed code attempt time-stamped to the minute. Hanlon exhaled through his nose, the kind of sound officers make when a case becomes clearer than expected. "She came with intent," he said quietly. A second deputy joined us, reviewing the footage again, this time paying attention to the inspection camera, the notebook, the measuring tape tools meant to fabricate violations, not inspect anything. Behind us, Patricia's voice cracked through the cold air. "You don't understand. I was checking for safety hazards. He's storing illegal." Hanlon lifted a hand. "Ma'am, we'll get to your statement. But right now, the only documented hazard is the damage you caused to his property." I handed him the thumb drive and printed logs. Everything categorized, everything undeniable. For Patricia, each second of that video was a nail sealing her own narrative shut. Deputy Hanlon closed the file folder on the evidence and turned toward her professional, steady but unmistakably decisive. "Miss Thornton," he said, "based on the video physical damage and recorded access attempts, you're under arrest for criminal trespass in the first degree, criminal mischief, and attempted burglary." Her face crumpled at the edges. "You can't arrest me. I was doing my job as HOA president. He's hiding things down there." Hanlon gestured back toward the open door. "It's a vegetable root cellar. The only thing he's storing is produce and gardening equipment." It was the simplest sentence of the night, and it destroyed every justification she had left. As he read her Miranda rights, she stared at me, eyes wide, breath unsteady, not angry, not defiant, but stunned, as if the ground rules of the universe had shifted beneath her. For someone who built her life on authority, losing it wasn't just humiliating, it was unthinkable. The deputies guided her to the patrol vehicle. The emergency blanket slipped off her shoulders, trailing behind her in the snow like a discarded symbol of the control she no longer had. Hanlon handed me a case number card. "We'll file everything tonight. Someone from the DA's office will reach out." I nodded, watching the patrol SUV turn around in the fresh drifts. The storm was nearly gone, but the weight she'd placed on my life for months vanished with those taillights. For the first time since this began, the cellar sat quiet, untouched, and entirely mine again. When the patrol vehicles disappeared into the last remnants of the storm, my property fell silent in a way it hadn't for months. No headlights pacing the street, no neighbors pretending not to stare, no gnawing anticipation of the next HOA letter or accusation. Just the soft, steady settling of snow blanketing the cellar steps where Patricia had dragged her boots hours earlier. Inside, I hung up my coat and stood in the quiet. My cameras continued recording the wind, brushing past empty driveways, but the threat that once lived in every shadow was gone. The relief wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like tension unspooling from muscles I hadn't realized were clenched. The next morning, my phone lit up in waves: neighbors, board members, people I'd barely spoken to. Some apologized outright. Others just wanted to know what happened, though I couldn't discuss details. Many admitted they'd felt pressured by Patricia for years, too intimidated to challenge her authority. Her arrest didn't divide the community the way I expected. It exposed one truth: everyone had been living under her version of order, and for once, they could say it out loud. 2 nights later, the HOA held their emergency meeting. I didn't attend, but word spread quickly. Residents lined up not to defend her, but to list the quiet grievances they'd carried for seasons. Stories of fines issued without cause, violations invented on the spot, harassment disguised as community standards, and unanimously they voted to remove her. The same voice she used to dominate every meeting now carried no weight at all. The district attorney's office reached out within 48 hours. After reviewing the footage, the logs, the timeline, and the deputy statements they made, the charges official: trespass in the first degree, criminal mischief, attempted burglary, each one supported by clear, irrefutable evidence she'd practically delivered to me herself. At her preliminary hearing, I testified calmly, just as my lawyer advised. Facts only, no emotion, no embellishment. It lasted less than half an hour. Her attorney tried arguing she'd acted out of community safety concerns, but the prosecutor countered with a single line: community safety doesn't require breaking into a private vegetable cellar during a blizzard. In the end, she accepted a plea deal: 6 months supervised probation, 100 hours community service, $2,500 restitution for my damaged lock and legal fees, a 2-year no-contact order. The HOA issued a formal manic intentions apology, professionally printed, unanimously signed, and delivered by certified mail. It acknowledged everything Patricia had done and formally recognized that my property sat outside their jurisdiction entirely. It wasn't triumph I felt reading it, just confirmation, a line in the sand finally respected. Spring thawed the edges of winter faster than usual that year. The snow retreated from the cellar entrance, revealing the repaired lock and the clean concrete beneath it. What had been a crime scene only months earlier was simply part of my home again, a quiet, stubborn reminder that boundaries weren't metaphors. They were real, tangible, defendable. A new HOA president stopped by one Saturday afternoon, polite and soft-spoken. She wasn't there to inspect anything. She just wanted to introduce herself and ask if I had concerns moving forward. For the first time since I moved back, the conversation felt like it belonged to two neighbors, not two opposing forces. I even donated part of my heritage seed collection to the community garden she hoped to revive. Oddly enough, it wasn't about mending fences. It was about finally having the space to be part of something without feeling watched. Word eventually reached me that Patricia had moved out of state, sold her house quick, no farewell posts, no dramatic defense, just gone. Perhaps realizing that the authority she clung to had never belonged to her in the first place. Sometimes karma isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet collapse of a life built on control. As for me, the storms feel different now. Not threatening, not foreboding, just weather. The cameras still record, but the tension behind using them has faded. The cellar is once again a place for storing vegetables, not evidence. And every night when I lock my door and glance across the empty yard, I feel the same steady truth settle in. Peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from defending the ground you stand on, calmly, patiently, and without apology.